So, hello everyone to this panel. First of all, thanks so much everyone to make it here, and also for the PyData organizers for making the panel happen. So when Katharine asked me to do a panel on ethical machine learning, I got super excited and so glad that we could do this. I think it's super fun to do this together with also talks and things like this to mix things up a little bit. So hopefully we can learn from this and start to be experimental in the way we organize our PyData events and try out interesting ways of sharing knowledge and ideas and etc. So, so my name is Roelof. I run a company, creative.ai. That's basically it. You can find more about me on Graphific, one of the worst possible nicknames on Twitter. But it's there. You can find it. And with me, I have Andreas. So Andreas, maybe you want to go first ahead. You cannot hear me. Should I talk louder? So let's start off with our first. So the question I'll ask everyone is like, can you shortly tell me who you are, what you do, and maybe something else you want to share with the room?
So, okay, I'm Andreas. I'm originally a trained physicist. I've been working as a data scientist for the last 4 years. So I spend 50% of my time working at a spin-off of 4 large German corporation called the German Cybersecurity Organization. What I do there is I try to analyze network data to find anomalies and make company networks more secure. And the other half of my time I spend at my own startup, 7 scientists. And what we're trying to do is to build data tools that make it easier for individuals and small companies to analyze their data and securely share it with others. Yeah, and cool. I'm also very interested in, of course, everything that is connected to ethics and machine learning, especially questions involving the fairness and how we can train algorithms such that we can be sure that we have a societal benefit from the results.
Cool. So next we have Marek Rosa from GoodAI. Welcome.
Hello. So my name is Marek Rosa. I'm from Prague, and I have 2 companies. One is King Software House, where we are developing video games such as Space Engineers. And the other company, and that's why I'm here, is GoodAI, where we are developing general artificial intelligence. And general means basically AI that can, or in the end, will be able to learn like people and create other AIs and basically improve itself.
Hello. Okay, my name is Françoise Provencher. I'm organizing PyData, PyLadies in Montreal, Canada. And I'm also leading a data science team in a company called Shopify. And yeah, that's what I do. So what do I do all day? I'm also a physicist. So I've been working in the industry for the last 2.5 years. And my interest with machine learning ethics, it's more around, so I feel like the company where I am is growing a lot, and we're increasingly using machine learning, and there's all these horror stories that you see on Twitter or in the medias, and I just want to make sure that the algorithms that we produce are, not propagating discriminatory practices.
Yeah, good afternoon, Berlin. I'm Hendrik Heuer. I'm a researcher with the University of Bremen, and my field is human-computer interaction. So I'm actually not looking at how machine learning works, but what it means to the people that interact with it. So this is about the usability of machine learning and especially trust. Why do people trust? When do people trust? And how can we measure that? And what I like about this panel and about the situation, in the university we think a lot about fairness, accountability and bias in machine learning, but you're actually the people who can make the difference, right? We can have nice theories, we can reason about it, but if you're the person to implement it, you can actually make the call. So I'm really excited to talk a bit about the issues we've been discussing in a more academic setting.
Excellent. Well, I feel very honored to sit up here. My name is Katharine Jarmul, and I help organize the PyData Berlin conference here. And when I'm not doing volunteer time things, I run a data science consulting company here in Berlin, where I work with clients on some of these problems. My background is a little bit more as like a Python hacker and experimenter. And because of this, when I first started doing machine learning and natural language processing, I immediately started to want to hack around and see what it was doing behind the scenes, and could I understand it and interpret it and see if I could break it. And through some of this experimentation, I found some really ugly things. And this made me care very deeply about how we, as applied data science, outside of the research elements, how we can really think about fairness in our models. This was my introduction to this field.
Cool. So for the first question, so let's first define what we're talking about, AI. So let's define AI, just anything which we see as a kind of computers making decisions. I think that's a very simple first thing to start with. So any kind of algorithm or anything which makes decisions based on human data, human-produced data. And in that regard, maybe we can start with, like, what are we, since we're talking about so many things which go wrong, and so many things which should go better, what are we actually excited about? So what are the things we're actually very happy about that is happening in the field over maybe the last couple of years? Andreas first.
So personally, I mean, I said this in my talk, I'm more optimistic than pessimistic when it comes to machine learning, because I think, like, today we have so many processes that are run like by humans, so to say, and that contain a lot of problems like bias, discrimination. And if we now like take all of that and like are able to like turn it into like semi-automated or like at least supervised processes using machine learning, I think we have a large chance of actually making many of these things better, you know, because it's not the case that we don't have any discrimination, for example, in hiring and like deciding who can do business with whom and who gets admitted also to a university. And I think by using AI, we have a large potential of actually making all of these things more fair for everyone. And in general, I'm like, especially in the last 5 years, I think like everyone else here, really impressed at what especially deep learning and neural networks have achieved in like not only creative AI, but in many specialized domains where they are already better than humans. So I'm personally really excited to see what will happen in the next 10 or 15 years, in which other things that today we think might be really difficult or impossible to do with such a system might become commonplace actually.
So my take on would be that I see, or like what makes me happy is that AI and AI safety ethics and all these things are becoming kind of mainstream. And even this general AI field, which was kind of niche and maybe even like the bad side of AI because it was too optimistic, to you know, like people were trying to do something which other people consider impossible, is becoming, I would say, kind of like mainstream, even though many people don't call what they are working on general AI, but from our perspective, it's actually general, because it's AI that is not only focusing on very specific tasks or designed for like very specific domains, but AI that can actually improve itself, or AI that can transfer knowledge from one domain to another, or AI that can design another AIs. So basically every month I am, like, as time is going, I am more and more surprised how many people are working on AI and how is it opening, and even stuff that, for example, a year ago, I was kind of unhappy because many of the progress that I've seen in AI, machine learning, deep learning were, from my perspective, just like very narrow things. And just 1 year passed, and I see all these articles, papers, and everything, and it's like really doing the universal stuff or going in this general direction. So that really makes me happy.
So something that really makes me happy in what's happening with regards to algorithm fairness is to see that people are getting organized for some things. Like, instead of just saying, like, oh, algorithms are mean, people are actually doing very, very nice things. And I want to give a shout out to the Algorithmic Justice League and like their way of fighting against some discrimination in for, like, say, face recognition software is to create a better training set with. So if you don't know the story, it's some people with darker skin tone don't get recognized by face recognition algorithms. And one way to address that is to actually have a better data set. So people are getting organized to create better data sets that are more inclusive and more diverse. And I think this will benefit the whole machine learning community.
Yeah, what I think is crazy, if we really think back, that we have something like Google is pretty amazing. You know, we can really search most of the books and we can find so many things with a fingertip. That's pretty amazing. And self-driving cars and all these advances, I could have easily imagined that being 15 years further down the road. We will see how quickly we'll actually ride in one back home and these kind of things. But what I really like about AI at this point is that this open source ethos did survive to some extent. We have Archive, we have GitHub, and if you look, for instance, at FaceApp, that was like really cutting edge research a year ago, and now you can buy, you can just get the app on the App Store and play with these kind of models. That's pretty amazing and unique, just how quickly and how open this is still happening, even though there's still room to the top.
I think for me, and I know that this is a sentiment that several folks in the conversations we've had prior to have said, is that sometimes we can use this AI now to actually counter our own biases. So one company that I came across that's doing a really amazing job is they're able to, you hook them up basically to management emails to teams, and when they see that you're unfairly distributing work, let's say somebody gets a really big project and another team, another member of the team gets only small little tasks. They're never assigned larger projects. It can actually send you a little reminder and say, hey, you know, Joanna hasn't received an important project in 2 weeks. Can you please, you know, send her one? And these types of things where AI can actually help us make decisions, right? Goes back to the origins of AI and these decision support systems. If we can build them to actually help counter our own biases as humans, then I think we can really have some better reactions to this, you know, kind of computer-assisted decision-making.
Cool. So that was the positive note. So, I mean, there's a lot of points to touch upon here, but one of the points going back with Hendrik you made about data, right? Google and data. So AI is also called the new electricity by Andrew Ng, and it's also called data is the new oil. So maybe anyone here wants to comment on that, like what does it mean when we have so much data in the world and make it accessible to machine learning algorithms? Like, is that good? Is it bad? What will happen? Is there different situations where we should think about? Maybe Hendrik can go first. Yeah, basically from an academic perspective, there's a really nice paper that basically social science always had big data. You know, there's like lack of data was never a problem for many scientific disciplines. And it's really the interpretation and the contextualization of this data that matters. And I think that that's truer than ever in a way, especially with more data, because more is not automatically better. If you look at, for instance, this Google Flu Trend project where they basically said we have search engines results and see what people are looking for. We can predict whether people have the flu and where. That looked really promising, but then it went terribly bad and just completely overfitted on the data. Related to that also, when we talk about data or more about making things more accessible to everyone, so there is a kind of a wave which I'm very excited about making more machine learning problems and models and data accessible to more people. Archive, GitHub, another project I'm running. Many binders, another IPython notebooks being shared everywhere, becoming more accessible. So what are the dark sides of all that sharing? Like, again, great, yes, we're all sharing things with each other. But what does this democratization mean? Anyone wants to comment on that?
I can start. One fear that I have is a fear that I notice sometimes with programmers that I work with is the copy and paste mentality. And I would say this, like, well, it was my top result on Stack Overflow, or it was my top result on GitHub. I'll just plug it in with my data and it will just work, right? I mean, if it's in the scikit learning samples, or if it's in these examples for how to use this library, what could go wrong? And I think a deeper understanding or conversation about exactly how we choose to do that, and exactly how we then choose to allow that to enter our products or into more customer-facing interfaces, then that becomes a really big concern. Because if I haven't really been thoughtful about what data I'm going to introduce, why am I choosing this exact algorithm versus another, or why this architecture, why does it work, then we don't have a good indicator of when it's going right and when it's going wrong. We just say, oh yeah, it's doing something, it looks intelligent, I would just keep doing this. And I'm somewhat fearful of this problem.
I mean, related to that, I think also a point you made, Françoise, about these are experts who are working every day with the algorithms and data, and the purpose is what, we can decide what the rules are that we want to have in our companies when we build products, or in your research faculties. And that's like point one, which I think it's already kind of a gain we can make, having kind of code of conducts or Hippocratic oaths for data scientists. And so I think that's like, again, like awesome that Shopify is doing that, for instance. But what about when we offer our services to users as an API or as a service, where models are trained, and as actual everyday users who might not know the implications of the data they're plugging into these systems? Maybe Françoise wants to say something about that?
Yeah, So I see this trend at conferences, like booths of companies that offer AI as a service. And this is all great because a lot of small companies cannot afford a whole data science team. But I feel that we just need to be cautious, or at least that these companies know. So let's say, their value proposition is that they have a lot of data, they train models, let's say a language model, then they offer their API to a lot of companies. What if this word embedding model is biased? Let's say it's sexist for some reason, and customers don't know it. I feel, I don't have all the answers, but I think they need to be transparent, and that the end user can ask them questions about, like, okay, is it okay to use your service for this end use? Because let's say that you're using a sexist or however discriminatory model to do things like rank jobs for people, for instance, then you're offering opportunities to people based on attributes that have nothing to do with their skills, but with things that have to do with other dimensions of diversity, like their gender or their ethnicity. So I think that when we consume this sort of API, it's on us to ask the question, is this working in the way that I want it to work? And there are things you can do because you control the inputs that you are sending and the outputs that you are receiving. So you can use your own, an association matrix package or something to figure out if you don't have like weird things happening there. But I think the services should also be aware of this, and that if there's something wrong with their model, to change it, because they are a very key player where they can have this huge impact on a lot of other companies that are using their services. Actually, I would be super happy to hear about someone who worked for such a company to know what they think about this, but there's none on this panel, I think.
So on the point of like asking questions, like Marek, since you work with like more long-term AI specifically as well, like what are the main questions we should ask? Developing AI now, looking into the future.
Mm-hmm. I would say, what is the value system that this AI should have? What are its preferences? And I think it's quite natural that the creator of the AI system, the teacher, the mentor, will want to imprint its own value system to the AI. Plus, then there is also some laws and things like that. And related to the previous question, the access to all this data, I would also want to say a different approach, and it's like we actually can generate a lot of data because we can create virtual environments and can generate as much data as you want. It's kind of like interactive data. And so we tend to think about this like curricula. So what kind of learning task or curricula we want to have our AI and to positively bias its actions, and also its understanding of the world. So in our work, especially in the long-term planning, because it's not a current issue, but in long term, we plan to have we call it School for AI, which will be a curricula with many learning tasks, from very basic to more complex. The AI will be learning like one task after another and using the learned skills, heuristics or whatever we call it, to learn the other more efficiently. And also, while doing this, it will be positively biased towards understanding the world in similar manner as we people understand the world, and also biasing its actions in a positive direction. So that's basically our plan. And then at the end of the day, of course, we'll have to test it, in some kind of sandbox environment where the AI will not know that it's actually being tested, and to make sure that its actions are really what we want it to do. So we don't want to have a black box system, basically.
Then that brings us also maybe to the question of who should decide on the properties AI should have? Is it us as engineers when we're developing our systems and we think, okay, we want our model not to be sexist, meaning we as engineers will make a definition of that and we'll test our model for that? Or should this actually be a wider agreed upon consensus decision within society, which can be debated, which can be maybe even law can play a role or legislated?
Yeah, if I may, there is already many laws, anti-discrimination and all these things, and there is also a new EU regulation coming next year. And on the other side, I'm not sure if it's possible to really enforce, that all the AIs will oblige to these regulations or this consensus. But at least we should try, of course. And yeah. And I think people in certain societies, they have this consensus, what is good, what is wrong, and they usually put this to the laws. So that's how I think it will get to the AI.
Yeah, I also don't see the engineering side of this driving, so to say, the rules by which the system should work. It's for me, a societal, political decision, and there are, for many things, as you said, already existing laws. I think especially concerning the privacy and data processing of personal data, it will get better than it is today with the regulation next year, the European Data Protection Directive. And I think in other areas, just as self-driving cars, for example, you can also see that there are efforts from the government to think about these problems. There have been the report of the commission, of the ethical commission on self-driving cars that was released 1 month ago, and which tries to answer also difficult questions like the trolley problem. Can a system decide to kill one person to save a number of other persons? And so I don't think that is something that engineers should decide on their own. So that's really must be a broader decision.
And this question really strikes a chord with me because I'm in exactly that situation. And I feel that, it starts with us, right? We are at the front line. We are the ones coding the algorithms. And so it just happens that we are the ones making those decisions. But then, from the ground up, you talk with the people in your organization and you try to figure out, because if I think that the threshold for, some variable, related to, say, data privacy or for discrimination. Maybe my colleague that's sitting right beside me has a different opinion. So I feel like we should reach some consistency inside our organization. And then also it's a very healthy thing to have this public discourse around all of this. And also I feel that laws are always a little bit late after the technology. So since we're already there, we should maybe inform what the next laws will be about.
So, Françoise, here you're making a point that we should be before the laws. We should kind of.
Yes, I don't think, because it's always so painful when there's a new law and then you have to change you have to swipe your database and start another one and scrub all the private information from there. Well, like if you think about those things in the first place, you will be in a much better place when there's a law that will, actually be angry with you for the things that you're doing. So we should be proactive, I feel.
But also answering that question, who is supposed to decide that? I think who will decide? We already know that. We already have it in place, right? We have political systems and everybody can participate and make themselves heard. And it's really, we have good protection for privacy and these kind of things. It's on to us to enforce them. And it's also to be critical engineers building systems to say, okay, this is against the law, and also escalating that up, because we're very fortunate, right? Even if we're not completely at the mercy of our employees, right? We'll find a job because we're engineers and everybody needs programmers at this point in time. So basically it's up to us to just, for instance, nice example is this discrimination on Facebook, right? There are many, many laws on you discriminating against people who want to rent from your house. It's not allowed. But if you then just take things that correlate, for instance, with race or gender or sexual orientation, you can again advertise to certain people, which you would never be able to do in a newspaper. You can't say, okay, I want white heterosexuals to work in my apartment. You can't do that. If you do ads on Facebook, you can easily do that. Why? I mean, why didn't they have like things in place to prevent that? It's easily preventable.
I echo the sentiment that we definitely need to have some of the first steps forward. I was able to attend part of Andreas' talk today, and I think one difficult thing that we have here is how do we measure these things? How do we evaluate them? And since there is, at this point in time, not a lot of consensus about how to do that well, we have this problem. Yes, I would like to build more ethical AI, but how do I indeed measure that and make sure that I am measuring with a similar standard to you at your company? I'm not saying that we need to standardize everything, but we need to have public conversations about how we're doing it internally within our own organizations, so perhaps we can create better standards across the board, rather than just each little pocket has their own determination of what is unfair treatment, which would be really problematic in the end then if a regulation comes down and just decides that it's X, Y, or Z, it only fits one particular problem then.
So we still have 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the room also for questions. But to go a little bit further on the topic of privacy and legislation and data, but what about the current business models which are in place with companies where we all work, where there are already systems which are proven to be inherently discriminatory in the bad sense, not in the machine learning sense. Compass is this system for recidivism rates in the US, which was mentioned in the keynote talk of this morning. But their argument would be, that this is proprietary information, like trade secrets, etc. So you can't really question these systems except by using them. Well, the counter argument would be, yes, that's totally true. Of course, this company cannot give access to their proprietary technology to everyone, because people would just copy-paste it and they would be out of business. So what would be the sentiment there? Like, well, how can we find kind of the good balance between having working business models and companies can still make money, but at the same time also be held accountable?
I think we have many systems in place again that audit companies or companies get certified to basically follow certain laws. And I think we just need to, and this is again up to us to tell the people who make the laws what is needed and where the risks are, because they might potentially not see them, but if we see them, we just kind of have to reach out, I would say.
So I think data is like a huge part of the problem, and so far it's really, as you said, as a user, really difficult to get my data from a company. I can try, in Germany there's some people that try to get their Facebook data, but it's a very long process, and the company has the longer arm, so to say. they don't have to give you the data if they don't want to. And if this really changes next year, I mean, it's my hope that it changes, then it will make it much easier to actually say, hey, please give me all my data and let me have a look at that. And then you can see, you can pool that data with the data from other people and like try to reverse engineer at least some of the algorithms and then see if there's some bias in there. I think that will already help a lot. And if that's still not enough to keep companies from doing things which are clearly hurting groups of people, then I think one should like think about more about regulation. You know, it's like some areas today where there are high risks in gambling, for example, are also areas where there's a lot of regulation. And data science or like algorithms are so far very little regulated. Maybe this has to change in the future. But it would be, of course, better if the companies by themselves would like open up their algorithms a bit more in order to avoid being regulated in the first place. So that's at least my hope.
Just a small thing, maybe the models, the AI should be more interpretable, explainable, and that will make it also easier for the third party to believe or trust in what the AI is doing, how much or if it is biased and so on.
Yeah, and I think just echoing some of these sentiments, if the consumer, the end user, right, who is maybe not aware of what data is available, not aware that they are being recommended particular search results rather than their friends, the more that there is consumer awareness, I think the more that there will be a push from the business side to build something that is slightly more transparent. And I think if we, maybe this is perhaps some of my American background coming in, but if we can make a financial incentive to have more transparency and more ethical treatment of data, then it becomes harder to say no when these large corporations have so much data on us.
So you're arguing for a carbon tax on unethical data decisions. A data tax. Yeah, that's an excellent idea. So what about research? Like, what kind of research is happening, but what kind of research should maybe be happening, both in academia as well as maybe in research centers, commercial research centers? Anyone has any ideas, like what should be the things we really should spend more time on?
I have an answer on the opposite, like what kind of research shouldn't happen. Because some things, and we talked about this earlier, I think in Germany we're very fortunate in that we, for instance, decided against using computers in voting, just because we said this is such fundamental technology that it should be transparent, that everybody should understand it. And I think we should also just look for these kind of things that we don't want to touch. And this could be voting, but this could easily also be the decision whether somebody stays in jail or not. Then we could just exclude that from algorithmic decision making.
More ideas about what should or should not be researched? Or, I mean, one thing, Marek, you mentioned on more interpretable models. I think that's a clear thing where there is more research.
Yeah, and happening. I think there is a lot of research coming into this area recently. So I think that's kind of like covered, at least on the research side. And I cannot think about any field that is not being researched that I know about. It's just, of course, the question is what is the progress, what is the state, and so on. But I think there are people who are researching the long-term things, short-term things, safety, ethics, then the AI architectures. So I think it's all covered. And maybe one thing that is actually like our thing at GoodAI is that we spend a lot of time on doing roadmaps and road mapping, and maybe it doesn't sound like the most important thing, but when you're actually working on some roadmap, you need to think about what are the states, what are the actors, what are the actions of these actors, what are their motivations, and so on. And you can start playing these games, and you will come up with different scenarios, and then you can start thinking about how to mitigate, these states. Like, for example, if these actors will do this, then this third actor will react in this way. And if it is a bad action, then how can the other actors mitigate this action before it happens? And so, for example, one of the things that we are also working on is AI race avoidance, which is like, it's a more long-term thing, but in the future, when there will be few companies that will be really getting close to this general AI, it can get like really hot, and the need to be first with this general AI may be bigger than the safety issues. So they may there may be imbalance between how fast they want to go forward versus how safe they want to go there. And I don't think there is a solution to this, because if the motivation to be the first will be huge, then there will be someone who will just go despite any risks. And so I think research on how to actually practically solve these issues, I think that's very relevant as well.
A lot of the academic research that I've read is great and all of that, but it always starts with we assume that we have data about these variables, and it just happens that where I'm working right now, we don't ask people for their gender, their sexual orientation, their age, their ethnicity. They're just merchants that use Shopify to sell stuff online. And one of the things that I struggle with is how do I infer this, not to sell something to those people, but to just make sure that my algorithms are not being discriminatory in a way that I could not detect otherwise. So the kind of things that I would like to see more of is how can I infer, how can I solve this dilemma? How can I not collect necessarily more data about the users, but making sure that they get a fair treatment from the algorithms.
Just to chime in, I would echo definitely on the interpretability aspect and the fact that sometimes I feel like we are in a bit of a hype cycle where we are more excited about something that can learn something very fast and in a very perhaps deep architecture than we are of our ability to diagnose if it goes wrong or so I think that this is one. And another one that is becoming more of a passion of mine is how can we break more of these algorithms? So can we do research on how to fuzz and break and make our models do bad things? The more that we understand how to do this, the more we can probably A, build better models, and B, be a little bit more aware of, more of the security hacker approach towards AI and machine learning than just how do I make the best model that will never break? How do we break more things?
I would totally echo that, breaking algorithms more. But that also gets us maybe into the last part of what are other things that we can do just in our everyday work as working with algorithms or machine learning models. How could we work to spread kind of this knowledge in the best possible way to make it a more societal-based discussion or make it more accessible to people as well, since inherently these systems play a big role in society, and therefore, one thing, breaking them makes always good for good stories as well, which is always a plus point. Maybe doing the opposite. So one project I used to run with a collaborator of mine was doing the worst possible thing we can think of with machine learning and offer it as a service. But then when we were just about to launch it, there was actually a company doing that. So it's hard. What else? What could be things which could kind of help us rethink machine learning, spike the imagination?
So I think a lot of the problem today with machine learning is that for the general population, so people that are not working in this field, it's still really hard to understand, for once, what can be done with their data and how the algorithms below the surface actually work. So I think it would be a good investment to try to explain better, not to a technical audience, but to people that use these systems, what exactly is in the data points that they're sending, because myself included, I also don't always have an idea of what you can do with just a few GPS coordinates of myself and what maybe sensitive information you can infer from that, and teaching people more about that and putting them in a better position to judge if they should give, for example, an app or a software access to some of their data. I think that would be already a big step in the right direction, because then people could decide themselves what they want to do. Today it's mostly okay, you install something and you take you accept the consequences that has, but you don't know really what you're doing. So And I think really that would really make a big effect, more than like trying to get a better like technological grasp on the problem. Just like getting the general population better educated about this.
And maybe also like the unsexy academic answer is just to be critical and to look really deeply into these systems and just try to understand them. Because if you really look at how Word2Vec works, it's no surprise that it would just have these biases, because it just takes them from the data. Or you look at image captioning, and in image captioning, a lot of the verbs, a lot of the adjectives, they're just inferred, because if you have a picture of a dog and a frisbee, there's only so many things it can reasonably do with it. So there's only 5 words, and one will probably be dominant, so he'll be playing with it. And you see these TED Talks where people say, like, yeah, we have solved computer vision, we understand images, while in reality we're not even close there. So just be critical and but also play with it and hack it and fuss it. I think it's very nice. Yeah.
Cool. One more last before we open it up to the audience.
Well, I would instead ask you to share a little bit more, because I find your work to be kind of inspirational in this, if you care to. I know you're speaking later, but for the...
Yeah, so I work with a lot of kind of creative applications of AI, and I think that one of the... So of course we do all kinds of things which are actually useful for our clients, for designers, but next to that we also like to take them for a swing, what we call computational comedy. So we really try to kind of find interesting properties and try to enlarge them, like make them bigger, and by that it's a bit like not necessarily completely breaking these models, but at least like bending them, which is then very interesting. So it's another way of building then more interpretative models, because it inherently tells you something about the model. Like Deep Dream at Google was born that way, right? It was an experiment where people just played around with this kind of pure classification models and started to get very interesting weird things they couldn't understand, and just started to play with it until it became this big, meme over the internet. But when I just started my PhD, which was, just then started around that time, a bit before, I actually spent a lot of time on Deep Dream, and everybody would, say, oh, this guy, that's not a... I said, I'm at the mathematics department, so of course that's not proper to do. But it was very useful for me to understand actually much deeper how these models operate. And then being able to do all kinds of new things with them, generative things. So I'm all for breaking them, hacking them, asking them questions which maybe sound very counterintuitive and would never work. So I think it's the people who are not necessarily educated the most as engineers who tend to do the most interesting things with these models, which bring the field further. So I'm also all for like multidisciplinary research, like having maybe hack parties where anybody can come, and you have maybe one machine learning expert, right? But then it's like journalists and whoever, visualizers. Cool. So then we have still 50 minutes. I think there's two mics for the room. So we have 10 minutes. 10 minutes. So please just shortly say your name, and then just, if you want to address anyone with a question or just random.
Hi, over here on your left side. So my name is Jonathan Ronan. I used to work in social science, and now I work in medical science. And in both of those fields, before researchers are allowed to do any study with private data, they have to go through ethics review boards that ensure that data is properly anonymized and treated, etc., prior to publication. Do you envision any way where we force companies to do this before they deploy a new data product?
So, what's the question?
The question is, why not? How come this hasn't been done today? It seems like such a no-brainer in academia.
Maybe Hendrik wants to comment as the academic in there.
Yeah, like it kind of like the first thought was this scandal with Google, Deep Dream, and the NHS, where they just used data that was given to them under a whole different licensing agreement, and just did something with it. I think it's an understanding problem, because you really need some people who can audit it and can basically make that decision for you, and it's really, really complex, and it kind of goes into this proprietary nature of the things that happen in companies, but you really have to have people who can make that decision reasonably, because you don't want to have an unsatisfying answer, because that will only slow down good research, and you don't want that situation. And you can't do peer review, you can't go to Facebook and say, is it okay what Google is planning here? So there we have a problem.
Hi, I'm Christian.
Françoise, you want to say something about this?
Sorry.
Sorry. So is the question like, why do companies don't give anonymized data sets to academia? Is that that's how I kind of understood the question? Or?
That wasn't specifically my question, was how come we don't force companies to have ethics review boards that would approve any data product before they release it?
Okay. Well, so nobody's forcing any companies, but some companies just decide to do it. But it would be nice that it would be forced on everyone.
Okay. Yeah, hi. I recall reading an ethical code of conduct that has been published by the American Society of Software Engineers. The document was about 25 years old, so maybe we need something newer. Are you aware of any efforts in that direction?
I think actually ACM is working on that, so they try to do that as we speak. And they're actually looking for feedback, so if anybody of you wants to pitch in, you're more than invited. I think everybody can talk.
There's also one that interestingly came out of the 2008 financial crisis in the United States called the Financial Modelers Code of Ethics. And some of it is applicable to this field, which is, I believe one of them is, I understand that sometimes I do not know what my model will do, and that the implications of my model functioning poorly could be massive.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting panel so far. My name is Valentin, and I have this question. So in the free software world, there's been an ongoing discussion for a couple of probably decades where they talk about amending the free software licenses to a non-military clause to basically disable defense and research and all this stuff to make use of the effort that has been going into free software by volunteers. Assuming that a lot of them will actually be, not be okay with their technologies killing people. I feel that in the field that most people work here, it's probably even more relevant to defense applications than regular free software. And I was wondering if there's any discussion or any like ideas to have a non-military use in agreements of the stuff that we produce.
Anyone knows?
I know about few activities or initiatives that are aiming towards some kind of ban for AI weapons, and things like this. And I actually recently signed one of these open letters, but I'm still not really sure if it's possible to ban AI weapons. Like even if you will have some regulation or something like this, I think the motivation to have AI weapons is so huge that there will be always some rogue actor trying to develop this in secrecy or something like that. So I think this is probably one of the things that needs more research, like how to actually guarantee that if we do some mitigation action, it's sufficient, and it's not just like saying that people please don't do AI weapons and hope that they will not do. I think we need more like some real solid proof or guarantee.
I mean, patents are one way how people tend to do sometimes these kind of things. So it tends to be, in my experience, at least what I know from my consulting years, it tends to be very individual decisions for companies, and sometimes patents help with that. So not at all for the open free software world so much. And I also know of many cases where actually researchers explicitly didn't want to take research funding from military organizations. But some of their research was actually done, even though they patented not to be used for defense purposes. It always tends to be hard to know if it's being used, since it's always of kind of classified nature. So, yeah, it's a chicken and an egg problem in that regard.
Yeah, I think a big problem is that a lot of funding comes from the military, especially in the States. And one thing to actually counter that, for instance, the University of Bremen has a so-called Zivilklausel, which means we can only do civil research. Everybody in the university. People are always trying to make it weaker, and it's a constant fight, but we've had it for a while now, and I think it's something that anybody could adopt, if only about sending a message, because I think that's the same with the open source, like how would you know that like some NORAD secret military people are using your software? It's really hard to tell, but it's good about sending a message.
And it's the same with export licenses. It is possible. Like I know of venture capitalist firms who take part of their own funding comes from public organizations. In Germany, for instance, it's quite common. German VCs who then are not allowed to invest in anything military or defense. So there definitely should be. I mean, if there's some good lawyers in the room, I think it's a good idea to think about these things. Why not? There is Creative Commons, which is, takes a kind of gradual approach to different things you can do with free software or commercial or remixing. So definitely I think it should be possible.
Hi, my name is Emily Gorsensky. This is a little bit of a direct question. 2 years ago, there was an article published. Its title is, "Here's Why There Ought to Be a Cap on Women Studying Science and Maths." This article was published by Breitbart.com, which is a merchant on Shopify's platform. How do you reconcile building machine learning tools ethically and then using those tools to support platforms that do the exact opposite?
Yeah, I don't really want to comment on this. Yeah.
I think maybe one last question, and then we'll have to move.
I had two questions. One, let's say we're just talking about the ethics, not ethics in machine learning. It's not that all the ethicists and all the population agrees on the ethics. You have different schools of thoughts. We can't just assume that everybody agrees with each other and then have our machine learning models follow those ethical systems. It's the same with the economic system. It's not that everybody's a neoliberal capitalist or everybody's a socialist. Now, how do you think we can have different performance measures following which, optimizing which, our machine learning would subscribe to those systems? And do you think we need that or not? Then you would basically attach an ideology to your machine learning and say, okay, my goal is to be a socialist here or to be a capitalist. The other question is regarding the anti-discrimination and privacy laws and personalization.
Okay, let's take to the first question. Sorry, anyone? When we create machine learning models, do we not imbue it with an ideology?
Yeah, I think it fundamentally connects to this idea of the value alignment problem from Russell's, right? Which basically says that if we build AI, we need to survive as humans, and this is really far out there, we need the machine learning or the AI to align their values with ours, to have the same values. And I think that's the same. I mean, it's just learning from data, it's learning all the biases, but also the good things from what's in the data, and we can build on top of that.
I mean, when you choose like a function that you want to optimize in your machine learning system, you kind of make a decision, of course, what I don't know if I would call it an ideology, because it's more like, in most cases at least, a very constricted problem that you're solving. So, but of course, you're always making a choice that also concerns your view on things like profit versus societal benefit, etc. So I think yes, but I don't know if we're already at a scale where it really would matter a lot. I think in some cases it really does, because as you can see, like news algorithms, they can change or maybe change the outcome of elections. So there you really need to think very hard how you want to do that. In some areas it's less critical still, you know. So, but yeah, it's definitely something that we need to think about. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then
just one little thing. So I think this objective function will not be one singular objective function, but probably made from thousands, millions of smaller ones, like local, maybe some hierarchies. And it's actually hard for me to even think about this, because it's just like what is the objective function of me, you know? Like, I cannot even define it myself. Like, I can to a certain extent, but there will still be so many things that I will not be able to say. And also, maybe there will be some conflicting objective functions within the global objective function of this system. So I think this is also one of the very interesting and not really solved problems.
I actually totally agree with the question. I think that is the case. If you see it wider, there are ideologies attached to what we do as machine learning practitioners, not only in objective functions, but also which data we decide or don't decide to use. But the solution there is choice, right? Having what is called interactive machine learning or mixed initiative systems, where it's human and computer working together. And so the choice is actually with the user, which means that your model has to allow for a certain sense of freedom, allowing choice, like having a Google search engine where you have a slider saying, yes, I give all my private data away, versus no, I don't want, meaning I don't give private data, I have worse search results maybe, but less filter bubble, versus all the way to the other side, yes, total filter bubble, but it's made more easy. And it's the choice, right, which makes it you know, so you can have different ideologies. You say, okay, I want the socialist setting, or the anarchist setting, or the capitalist setting. Cool, so thanks so much, everyone. Then we're off to another room for more Q&A.